So, hello everybody. If you joined Andre and I for the live stream the other day, we talked a little bit about renting an apartment, buying a condo, which they still call apartments here, or purchasing a house here in Albania. So I thought I would kind of just make an independent video for it because it gets a little bit more circulation, and I thought it would be something new for me to try anyway. So here we are on the waterfront of beautiful Lake Ohrid in Pogradec, and I wanted to kind of go over, what it's like to purchase a house here or to purchase a condo or rent an apartment. So first thing I would say, obviously you have to figure out what location you want to be in, and if you want to be waterfront, it's going to be more expensive. If you want to be in one of the villages, it can be significantly less expensive. That's going to be your main consideration. Or if you want to be in like a bigger city like Vlora or Tirana or somewhere like that, the prices are obviously going to be considerably higher. Um, so I guess that's your first step. You probably already decided, hey, I think I want to move to Albania. What's the procedural thing? What do I have to do? First thing is, like, finding a place here can be really difficult. There are real estate agencies. There's even a Century 21 in town. I know Remax is present in the country, although I don't think they have any representation here in Pogradec. But if that's something you're interested in, they are available. It can be a little difficult to get responses from them, though. So you're going to need to kind of scour the internet. And this is something else you have to know. If you're looking at places online on the internet, the prices tend to be inflated because they know that they're kind of catering to more of an international audience. So it really helps to be on the ground. And if it's something you're really interested in, you can hire someone like me, and I will hunt for houses and apartments for you. That's something I do on the side. And if you look at some of my other videos, I have a couple of houses on there, and I have another one coming soon, and some apartments as well. The apartments are for rent, and then the houses are for sale. So that's something I do on the side. Otherwise, my recommendation to you would be to come here and spend some time. Like, you really have to come and look for yourself, and walk around town and look for sale signs, which in Albanian is shitet, Shitet. And that's kind of what you have to do if you really want a place here. You're not going to find much online, and what you do find online is going to be somewhat inflated in price. So there's lots of advantages to renting an apartment, obviously. You can get a place like this with a gorgeous view. Generally speaking, apartment rentals between $300 to $500 a month, depending on how nice they are. You can get things that are cheaper, but they won't have any kind of view. It'll just be kind of, on a lower floor somewhere with a view of another building. Or you can get something a little bit more expensive, which would be, like a really nice penthouse or something like that. Generally speaking, I don't know anyone who's paying more than 500 unless you come here short term and do an Airbnb for like a couple of months. Then there was somebody who was paying about $700 a month. So that's kind of how that works. Obviously, I'm assuming if you're watching this video, you've decided that you are interested in living in Albania. And why wouldn't you be? It's a beautiful place. The prices are very reasonable compared to the United States or the rest of Europe. And it's just it's a nice place to live. Great food, really friendly people, a really interesting history. And if you decide to move somewhere like Pogradec, you have the advantage of being right on the border of Greece and North Macedonia. So you can take day trips, and it's really a nice place to be, and gives you a lot of options. So I think I'll talk a little bit about renting an apartment here first. Like homes, you might have a hard time finding things online. One of the things I do for people is I will hunt down apartments for rent. I will hunt down homes that are in the area because so many things are unlisted. And unfortunately, if you are finding things online, the price tends to be somewhat inflated because they know that it's going to be largely foreigners that are looking at these apartments and so forth. So that's something for you to keep in mind. Yeah, so there are some real advantages to living in an apartment. So you can come here, rent a place for 6 months or a year, and then you can decide, hey, I don't really like it, or I love it, and I want to sign a long-term lease. But if you don't like it, you can always just move along. Apartments here, like anywhere, come with some serious caveats. One can be, your neighbors. I've heard of people that have had next door neighbors that would argue all the time. They can hear them through the walls, or they have somebody above them that, like, for whatever reason, decides to rearrange furniture at 2 in the morning. That's pretty uncommon, but it does happen, and it's the sort of thing that you can run into with an apartment no matter where you go. So my recommendation would be, if you're interested in doing something like this, to come and rent for a while first, even if you have to go the Airbnb route and spend a little extra money, and see if that's something that you're really interested in. The other thing would be like building maintenance. So building maintenance here is a little different than it is in the U.S., and some buildings are better than others. But there are people that have had some issues with, like, oh, the building isn't well maintained, and what I mean by that is, like, the entrance ways and things like that can be not so nice. And in the United States, we kind of get used to a nice entryway, and things being kept very clean, and that sort of thing. Whereas, here you might have a beautiful apartment, but your journey from the front door and the entranceway to the elevator to get to your front door of your apartment can be, not that appealing. I know that was an issue my parents had when they came here. Is they were like, oh, like, we want an apartment, but we want the entranceway to be nice. We want there to be flowers and things like that. You're not going to find that here in Albania. That's at least not here. Maybe in Tirana, maybe in some of the really high end places, but generally speaking, I mean, look, the entranceway, so they get cleaned. I think the one here was getting cleaned weekly, and now it's getting cleaned a couple times a week. But, like, it could use a paint job, and there are some other things. That's just something to consider when you are thinking about maybe renting an apartment here. And it's obviously something to consider if you're considering buying an apartment here, because once you buy something, you're kind of locked in unless you want to sell it. So again, I would highly recommend, if you're interested in a place here, and I'm, like I said, here in beautiful Pogradets, rent a place for a while and see if you like it, and then maybe you can even make an offer to buy it from the owner if you really like it. You never know. Everything's for sale in this world, right? So those are just a couple of things to consider with renting an apartment. You can buy a house, which eliminates some of those issues. You're not going to have to worry about neighbors through the walls or above you when it comes to doing maintenance and so forth. It's all on you. If something breaks, you got to fix it. But at least you know that you can go out, go to the hardware store, get what you need, or hire someone to come out and do it, as opposed to having to rely on, like, a building manager or something along those lines. Something else you might want to consider, and this is really important. So notaries here have a lot of, I'll say, legal power. The notaire or the notary. It's not like in the U.S., where it's just somebody that certifies two signatures and is basically a witness. They do contracts and all sorts of things, and they really play an important role. So if you're renting an apartment, something that can happen sometimes is the person renting the apartment to you might just draw up a contract. You and they sign it. They give you the keys, and you give them, first and last month's rent, or whatever contract you come up with. But if it isn't signed by a notary, it's pretty much worthless. It's not a real legal document. So they could be in, like, 3 months. You sign a 1 year lease. In 3 months' time, they can be like, you know what? I want to raise the rent, and if you don't like it, that's too bad. So you have nothing to fall back on. So if you do come here and you decide you're going to rent an apartment, that's something beyond, like, just having an Airbnb for a couple of months. That's going to be a little different. But if you're going to sign a long-term lease for 6 months or a year, I highly recommend that you go through the notary process. So you and the owner will take the contract to the notary. It'll probably cost you, it'd be less than $50. in most cases. And there are lots of notaries. There's notaries all over any city you go to here in Albania. You're not gonna have a hard time finding a notary. You might have a little bit of a hard time finding one that speaks English, but I guarantee you'll be able to find one. So I highly recommend that that's something you do. You go to the notary, you make sure that you actually have an official legal document, so you have a leg to stand on if they decide to change the rent, or if they decide they just want to kick you out and sell the apartment or something like that. It doesn't happen very often. It's very rare, but it can happen. Just like it could happen in the U.S. or anywhere else. If you don't have if you don't have a legal lease, like a real document, then it's really just a piece of paper with signatures on it that can be torn up and thrown away, and you have no recourse. So I do highly recommend, if you decide to come and rent, that you go through the notary process and you make sure that at the end of that, you have an official document. All right, so as I was saying earlier, a notary or a notaire here in Albania, and I believe this is pretty common in all of Europe, is not like what we have in the United States, where they're just somebody who verifies your signature. They have some legal power here, and they are responsible for contracts and things like that. So when like I said earlier, if you rent an apartment, you're going to want to have that contract certified by a notary here, and that'll make the document legal. If you're buying a house here or an apartment, you're going to run into the same thing, whereas all this documentation, the contract, and all that will be done through a notary. Now, in the U.S., we normally have like a real estate agent or an attorney, and you might go through a real estate agency here, but it will still end up at some point going through the notary process. And this is a really important caveat, because they're going to be the ones who are going to tell you what documents you need and what your responsibilities are for both the buyer and for the seller. And they will be the one that will hold the escrow account in most cases. And that's basically how things work here with that. Everything you're going to do, including just general life stuff. If you buy a car, you're going to end up at the notary. Any kind of contract that you do with somebody, there's a really good chance you're going to have to go through a notary here to make it an official legal document. So if you decide to buy a house or an apartment here, you will be dealing with a notary, and they are very common. Every city has several. Here in Pogradec, I know of at least 5. And out of those, I believe 3 of them speak English. So it won't be a problem. The other caveat is different notaries will probably require different documents. And I'll go over some of the document requirements when I get to my next locale. So what your notary may require is going to vary depending on the notary. This is kind of how things tend to work in Albania, not just with notaries, but government offices. And there's going to be, there is nothing set in stone. I mean, obviously there's some basics that are set in stone, but different notaries, different government officials, may require different things for the same exact process. And it just depends on how thorough they are. They want to make sure in most cases that everything is done correctly and by the book. Some people are looser than others. You'll find this with purchasing a house. You'll find this with getting a residency permit. A lot will depend on who you end up going through. So I know people who have purchased property here and not required anywhere near the documentation that I was required to submit. And it's going to depend on the locale too. Like, so maybe the cadastral office, which is the people who deal with zoning land and creating the property maps and basically assigning titles and things like that. They might require different things here in Pogradec than they do, say, in Elbasan or Vlora or Saranda or something like that. And it's just, there's going to be the basic things they're going to require, but some might be more lenient than others. So, like I said, I have some friends, shout out to Dan and Michelle, who didn't need near the documentation that my notary required. And he said, he wanted to make sure that everything went to the cadastral and got approved. And he was very, very thorough. One of these things, there's going to be a few basic things that are going to be really important. So one of those is going to be a document for your identification. And in my case, just a passport, which you would think would be enough, was not enough. They wanted a secondary form of identification. In my case, I moved here from Maine, and so I had to go to the state capital of Maine, present my driver's license, make a photocopy of it, make a written statement saying this is, my official ID from the state of Maine. And then I went to the notary office in the State Department there, and they notarized it. And then I also needed an apostille, which is an official cover letter that they seal on to the photocopy with the picture of my ID and everything on it, that says, we as the state of Maine certify that this is absolutely an official state document. And it's got a little seal on it and things like that, so you can't remove it from the original document. So it shows that this is a hyper official document. And that is one of the things that my notary requires. Yours may not, but I highly recommend that you just get some of these things done if you're coming over here and planning to purchase a home, so that you have them, because you don't want to try and do it from abroad, because that would be really difficult. Even doing it in the United States was really difficult for me because I needed several documents, and I'll go over the others once I move here. So one of the other things that my notary required of me was my divorce paperwork. So in Albania, the basic birth certificate here is a living document, which is not like what we have in the United States. So your birth certificate in Albania is basically, it's more like a life certificate. So it is an evolving document. So if you have a birth certificate here, it's going to show, the same stuff that your birth certificate in the United States will show, but it will also show your marital status, who you're married to, where you live, who your parents are, who your kids are. It's like kind of a one-stop shop for information on who you are as a person. And obviously in America, we don't have that. We have a birth certificate, they print it when you're born, and then it's done. So you're going to need some forms of proof to show what your marital status is, because you're buying a piece of property and they want to make sure that when they create the deed and everything, that everyone is included or not included who should or should not be on this particular document. So for me, there's nothing we have in the U.S. There's no official document that shows, hey, I'm single. There's nothing that shows that you're married, except for like a marriage certificate. So in my case, I am divorced, and what they required of me was to go. I was divorced in Florida, so I was living in Maine, so I had to go online and order my divorce paperwork from the courts in Florida, and then get those apostilled in Florida. So I had an official document that showed that I was no longer married, and it had the apostille, which from the state of Florida, which showed this is a hyper official document from the state of Florida. The state of Florida certifies that the documents I was presenting are true and real. And that's just one of the things that you might have to deal with. So if you're married, I would suggest having that done with your marriage certificate. If you're divorced, I suggest you have your divorce paperwork ordered from whatever state you were divorced in and get it apostilled. Again, I know people who didn't have to go through this. My notary was extremely thorough, and he wanted to make sure everything was done, absolutely every T was crossed and every I was dotted and everything was completely done, so there won't be any problems in the future. So that's an important consideration. Make sure that you get this kind of stuff done before you come over. And the other thing is, they will take this from you. So when you submit these documents, they don't just like scan them and then give them back. They'll keep them. So you might want to get several copies. It's not that expensive. I think total for all my apostille documents, I needed a few $100s. I needed my birth certificate, I needed my divorce papers, and I needed my ID. So these are some things that you're going to want to consider. So the other document I needed was my birth certificate. That was from yet another state. So I had to get that from the state of New Jersey. And this was a little bit more complicated because with Florida, I did everything online, and they got my divorce paperwork and apostilled it. So basically, went from the courts to the State Department where it got apostilled and then sent to me. It was a online, one service fits all. So every state's going to be different. When it came to the state of New Jersey, where I was born, I had to order my official birth certificate. And again, I ordered 3 of them. So I wanted to make sure I had multiple copies in case I needed them for anything else, because you never know what people are going to require for you to conduct business here. So with the state of New Jersey, I had to order my birth certificate, and then the records department in New Jersey sent it to me in Maine, and then I had to package it back up and send it to the State Department in New Jersey, and then they apostilled those and then sent them back to me. So every state's going to be different. Hopefully you won't have to go through as many states as I had to go through. So I had 3 documents that I needed that were official, that were apostilled from 3 different states. And it was a major hassle. I also had COVID while I was doing all this, and I didn't even know what an apostille was until I went through this process. So, these are things that you might want to consider. And again, it's might cost you a couple $100 for all the documents you need, but it'll be well worth it. You don't want to get here and end up having to shop notaries to find the one that's going to require less documents, and then have them submit those documents in the cadastral office, be like, well, they're not apostilled, so we're not going to accept them. Again, this is going to vary depending on what notary you go through, the cadastral office that you're dealing with. The notary and the cadastral office in Elbasan might be different than what was required here for me in Pogradets. But you're going to be better safe than sorry. Get the documents, have them together, and get multiple copies so that you have them. I think it'll be well worth it. It's one of these things that'll just make your life a little bit easier when you get here. And you want things to be easier. You don't want things to be difficult. And they're going to be. The process is going to be a little bit strenuous, a little bit difficult, tedious. So keep these things in mind, and just try and have all your ducks in a row before you even come over. So as I was saying earlier, you're going to do most of these processes through a notary. However, you don't want to get into a situation here where you go to purchase a piece of property, and maybe your notary and your cadastral office are a little bit less stringent, and they kind of let you go through the process. And the deal gets concluded, money changes hands, and then out of the woodwork, a year later, there is a nephew somewhere living in Germany or something like that comes back and says, oh, hey, officially somewhere in the documentation is my name as well, so I have a claim on your house. This isn't just a problem in Albania. I've heard about this happening to people in Greece and things like that, where you have these hereditary things. You have a house that's been passed down through the generations, and along comes a grandson and says, hey, this is my family house and I have a claim on it. So this is the one case where I do highly recommend you get a good attorney that can go through the property documents and make sure that all the names that are anywhere on any of these documents are signed for. So I ran into an issue where we thought things were, and I hired a lawyer, and I'm really glad I did to do this very process. We worked through the contract. We thought everything was good. I went to a lawyer and was like, hey, let's make sure everything is free and clear, and I'm going to own this house without having any issues. And it turns out that the people I was buying the house from had a son who was in Germany, and deep in the paperwork, his name appeared. And it turned out I needed his signature as well in order to purchase my house and not have to worry about him coming back, in a year or two and being like, hey, this is actually my family home and I have a claim on it. Very important. I highly recommend you do this. In my case, it ended up so I had to wait for him to come back to Albania to visit his parents. So from the time I started the purchase of my home until the time we finally closed and the deeds were transferred and it became officially my house, it was a good 5 months. So it would behoove you to do all this beforehand. Make sure that the people who own the house are selling you the house are the only people that need to sign for it. That's something you're going to want to check on. You don't want someone coming out of the woodwork and making a claim on your property that you just paid 100,000 euros for. You think it's yours, and then you find out, oh, lo and behold, legally somebody else has a claim or a partial claim. You have to share your house with one of these folks' relatives or something that have moved to a different country. It's very unlikely, but it can happen, and it has happened. I know it's happened to people in Greece where they bought a house and someone's come along and said, hey, this is my house too. And then you have to go through a legal fight to make sure you get your house. So I don't want that to happen to you. So these are just some pointers, some things that I think might make your life, no, they won't. They will make your life a lot easier. Make sure you have your paperwork. Make sure that the house is going to be 100% yours. Make sure that your notary is a good notary and does things by the book and submits the proper paperwork to the cadastral unit, in your particular municipality, and make sure everything goes smoothly so that you have a good experience purchasing a home in Albania. Something else you're going to need is a translator. These are common here as well. This is not an abnormal thing. Obviously, okay, now you have your documents. You've come here, you found a house that you like, and you're going to have your documents translated. And then when you do your contract with the notaire or the notary, you're going to need have those documents translated as well. So you will need an official translator who will do this, and they have their own stamp and everything. It's a very official process, and it has to be exact. So it's not like something you can just do with like AI, Chat GPT or something like that. They will require that you have a very specific document. So let's say it's your birth certificate, and the translator will have a program, and it will make that document. But including like the borders and any kind of little special, little nuances that this particular document has, the way it's boxed off, the borders, everything about it. And they'll make an exact copy of that, except instead of being in English, all the lettering and everything like that will be in Albanian. And so you're going to want your contract to be that way, and you're going to want all your official documentation to be that way. And that way, when everything gets submitted, everything is in Albanian. And also, this allows you to have a copy of the contract that's in English so that everything is clear. Both parties know exactly what's expected of them, including the price and everything like that. This is another thing, the price. So in Albania, they use lek as a currency. If you have this done, you want to make sure that you do it, you establish what currency the deal is going to be in. So like in my case where I had an individual who had to sign on the document who was in Germany, it took a couple of months for him to get here to sign on it so we could complete the transaction. The currency rates changed in that time. When I set it up, we weren't clear on what currency we were using. And so I ended up losing a couple percent because the dollar fell against the lek. So in the contract, you want it to be very specific, and you want to make sure this transaction is in US dollars, or this transaction is in Albanian lek, or this transaction is in euros. And no matter what happens between now and then, that's going to be what the transaction is going to be in. So, the currency rate changes by the minute. So you might end up owing less in dollars or more in dollars, depending on where the currency goes during the time this is in process. But, this is just one of those things. This is part of the reason you want a translation. And this is just one of the caveats of doing any kind of business overseas. You want both parties to understand we're doing this deal in this particular currency, and that's how it's going to be. Very important step and something you don't want to overlook. Another consideration that you're going to have is whether or not you're purchasing a property that has agricultural land. Now, this was an issue for me with the purchase of my house in the village. So the way the law is in Albania is you can buy a house, you can buy an apartment, you own the land that the house is on, and that zoning is called truall. So if you have a house with land that's zoned truall, no problem, you can buy it. However, a lot of times, particularly if you're buying a house in the village, you have the house, and then even if it's just like in my case, it's more or less a large backyard with I have a little orchard back there, but it was zoned agricultural. And this can be a real source of issue. So you found that, your dream home, you want to live in the village and it's got fruit trees and oh, how nice. Well, it turns out the parcel that the house is on and the backyard is actually two separate properties. So the house will be zoned truall and the backyard will be zoned agricultural. And you, as a foreigner, are barred from owning agricultural land. So how do you get around this? Well, you can try and get it rezoned, but I don't know anyone who's really had any luck with that. My understanding is in order to have a piece of agricultural property rezoned to truall, you have to submit a building plan to the cadastral unit, and then they will approve or deny you that rezoning. However, one thing you can do is even though you as an individual are not allowed to own a piece of agricultural land, technically a foreign corporation can. So what you could do is open a business here in Albania, which is an SHBK, same thing as an LLC in the United States. And so you'll buy the house, that'll be in your name, but your land will actually be in the name of the company. And hopefully maybe you have an Albanian you trust that and they can sign on to it with you. That can help with the cadastral unit deciding whether or not they'll approve it. But I think for the most part, if you go through the process, you register a company here in Albania, and you decide and you use that company to purchase the property, it should be okay. That seems to be how things work. I know other people who have done this, and if you need a suggestion for attorneys to help you set this up, I can leave it in the comments, and I can recommend some attorneys for you. There's some really great ones in Tirana that really streamline the process. It costs, I think it ended up costing me a couple, maybe $3,000 for the entire thing, because you will have to pay some taxes and some things like that. You'll form the company, and they will require some more documents. Again, it's good to have that stack of apostille documents. And then in the case of forming a company, they'll also probably require copies of your degrees. So they wanted a copy of my multiple degrees, not just one. They wanted a copy of my bachelor's. They wanted a copy of my master's. I think they even wanted my high school diploma. So these are all things you're going to want to have. They didn't require that they were apostilles, but they wanted to see that you are capable of having a company. It's kind of a strange thing, but if you have degrees, make sure you have them. And it was the official ones. It wasn't just a photocopy. I had to present my attorneys with my actual diplomas and my degrees from college and everything. And then they kind of certified that they were real, and I think they photocopied them, scanned them, and then gave them back to me. But that might be something that's required. So if you want to have a piece of land that's agricultural, this is the process you're going to need to go through. And as long as your company is active, you're going to be paying taxes, and you'll have to have an accountant. And the lawyers can help you with this. Again, if you want a recommendation for attorneys, there are some in Toronto that are really good, and they'll kind of set all this up for you. And you'll go through this transaction. You'll form your company. You'll use your company to purchase a piece of property. And then you can actually switch your company to being inactive. Now, your company will still exist, and you can reactivate it at any time. But basically, that means I'm no longer doing any kind of business. I'm not buying or selling anything, nor am I making any money. And then at that point, you stop paying taxes. Your company becomes inactive. until you decide, oh, I'm going to start a microbrewery here. And then you can use that company you can reactivate that company and use that as your legal basis to have a corporation here, an LLC. So this is an important consideration if you want to buy a house with any kind of land attached to it. Again, here in Albania, chances are if there is any sizable property around the house, especially almost always in the villages, that land that is not the immediate parcel that the house is on is going to be zoned agricultural, and you're going to have to go through this process. Um, Houses inside town are going to have yards and so forth. They're going to be smaller. It'll probably all be zoned true wall. Won't be an issue. If you want something in the hinterlands, if you want a nice, big, like a farm, you're going to have to go through this process as a foreigner unless you're of Albanian descent. So this is an important thing to keep in mind. Get those apostilles, bring your diplomas, bring every piece of paperwork that you can imagine you can possibly need in order to make this transaction go smoothly. Again, depending on the notary, depending on the cadastral unit, they may require more or they may require less. In my particular situation, it seemed like they required the maximum. And that was okay by me because I wanted to make sure that once I went through this transaction, that everything was going to be done properly and legally, and I wasn't going to have any issues in the future. But I do know people that have purchased property here, and nowhere near as much documentation was required of them. Now, they bought apartments, so they didn't have to go through the issues of agricultural land and so forth. But this is just kind of how things work here. Hopefully your experience is easier, and the worst case scenario, you have some apostille documents that you didn't need. That's, that's a great world to live in. The smoother things go, the better. But if you need some of these things, you're going to want to have them on hand. You're not going to want to try and track down documents from overseas. Um, that you it would be it'd be really hard because you're going to have them shipped here. And my understanding is apostilles are only technically good for 6 months. You can take them to one of the notaries and they can, file an extension on that. They can basically just, take your document, confirm it's real, and then give you maybe another 6 months on it. I had to do that at one point. I ended up not needing that particular document, so I never needed that apostille again, but I went through that process just to make sure if I needed it, I had it. So I think that's where I'm going to wrap this up today. Again, none of this is legal advice. This is just, my recommendations, disclaimer. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a real estate agent. I'm just trying to give you some pointers and let you know what you might need to do to make your transactions here go smoothly, and so you can make your dream of living in Albania come true. And I hope this has been useful. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them in the comments section. I try to get through all those. I read everything. So, and if you need any recommendations, particularly in progradets, for translators or things like that, I have my guy, and I can make things go a bit more smoothly for you. I can recommend a couple of different notaries, a couple of which speak English, which makes all the difference in the world. I have a translator. He can make your process go a bit more smoothly. And if not him, yeah, if he's too busy, he can recommend another translator because he's been very busy lately. So he's actually asked me not to send him Americans in some cases because he has some other business that he's dealing with and he's kind of overwhelmed sometimes. But no matter what, if you need help, I can help you. And yeah, I hope this was helpful. And I'll say goodbye now and Mira Popsham.